Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation on THCV. I'm Dale Hunt, founder and CEO of Breeders Best, a company that was created to help independent cannabis breeders protect their unique cultivars and license the rights to growers worldwide. We're happy to have you here with us and to have our medical director, Dr. Ethan Russo, presenting on this really important cannabinoid. I'd like to extend a special thanks to the Breeders Best team for organizing this event. We're very proud of this team and hope that you'll check us out at breedersbest.com. There's a page about our team, and I think it's really world class, and so thankful for everybody who supports this company. I'd also like to thank the breeders we work with and the breeder community generally. Without your creative work, the present and future of plant medicine just would not have the promise that it does. And one last thing before we get started. We welcome your questions. You can ask questions at any point in the seminar just by tapping on the Q&A button on your screen. Please avoid putting your questions into the chat. We may miss them there. And from there, I'll hand it off to Ethan.
Well, good day, and everyone welcome to tetrahydrocannabivarin, THCV, Properties and Promise. Thank you for joining us. First, a disclaimer. Almost nothing that we're going to discuss today is FDA approved. The interventions presented in this program are for education and cannot be used for commercial purposes without express written permission of Breeders Best. If such therapies are applied, outcomes will vary. So this is the story of THCV. So the substance was first isolated in 1970. So this is about 6 years after THC and some of the others. And one of the discoverers was a then very young researcher named Roger Pertwee. And this was his first published journal article in Nature, no less. How often does that happen? Well, never these days. But they isolated THCV from this tincture of cannabis that was part of the British formulary until 1961, actually. So at the time, it didn't have a name, but to quote from the article, there are at least 6 pharmacologically effective components of cannabis. I include that because now the number is far, far higher. So what they described was an N-propyl analog of THC, meaning that it had 3 carbon side chain instead of the 5 that is typical of the pentyl cannabinoids such as THC. Later, it came to be called tetrahydrocannabivarin, or as we'll say, THCV for short. The tested substance was 4 to 8 times less active in producing catalepsy, lack of movement in mice, as compared to THC at 5 milligrams per kilo. Subsequently, this was tested in humans by Leo Hollister, did his work at Veterans Administration hospitals and was the Dean of American Clinical Studies. I'm proud to say that his last article was one we published in the Journal of Cannabis Therapeutics in 2001. But in 1974, he gave 6 humans 7 milligrams of THCV intravenously. 1 reported no effects, 5 described moderate or mild THC-like effects. Based on this, and we don't typically give cannabinoids intravenously, he estimated that THC was about 25% of the potency of THC. So here's the biosynthetic pathway. What we normally see is a combination of olivotolic acid and geranyl pyrophosphate leading to cannabigerolic acid, which upon decarboxylation would be CBG. And then depending on which enzymes are most active, this can go on to THC in the form of THCA in the fresh plant, CBD, or in a recessive gene, cannabichromene. However, geranyl pyrophosphate can also combine with this precursor, divernic acid, which Again, looks like a levotolic acid, but has only a 3-carbon side chain. What results from this marriage are the propylcannabinoids, the 3-carbon side chains, starting with cannabigerivinic acid and with THCA synthase, the same enzyme that produces THC, it can act to produce THCV acid. Again, with decarboxylation, this will be THCV. Now, some studies that were done, inhalation studies circa 2004 or so, these were done under legal conditions. This is the report of one person, 2.5 milligrams of inhaled vapor, and this was a blinded study. Vapor was said to be harsh, with a creepy, meaning slow onset, but with mood elevation, some psychoactivity, a feeling of increased sensory acuity, sharper vision, hearing. When THC preparation was taken later, this seemed to cause a blocking of the effect. Because this was blinded, it was asked what the guess was. It's the substance. The first guess was THC, but later revised. Again, a blinded situation with 10 milligrams of inhaled vapor was again reported to be harsh, moderately psychoactive with mood elevation. Again, increased sensory acuity, a pleasant feeling, and again, some blocking of THC effect after subsequent administration. In a third application, not blinded, THCV 40 milligrams plus THC 6 milligrams was inhaled with a vaporizer. Again, acrid taste, feeling of initial buzz, never uncomfortable or hard to handle. There was a decreased hunger, an anorexic effect lasting some 5 hours, but with no nausea. The person reported that they were not as hungry as expected in a prolonged fasting state, having missed breakfast. And by lunchtime, the person reported ability to eat, but with no urge, which would be fairly atypical. Scientific study was really only picked up in earnest about 2005. And this is again from Dr. Pertwee's group, who picked this up after essentially a 35-year gap. So they looked at THCV in terms of receptor binding and found that it displaced this agent. CP is a high potency full agonist at the CB1 receptor. So THC was able to displace this with this level. And it also worked on humanized CB2 cells, Chinese hamster ovary cells, with a relatively low concentration necessary. THCV inhibited THC evoked contractions of the vas deferens, implying that it had an antagonistic effect. Now, this next one I will report, but say that I'm afraid it was an error. They thought at the time that THCV was a CB2 antagonist as well, but as we'll see subsequently, this was later overruled. So they looked again at THCV and similarly saw pure substance could displace CP 55940. It also attenuated, reduced THC-induced tail flick, ringing mobility, and hypothermia responses in vivo in mice. They again examined the pharmacology in 2008, and the overall feeling was that THCV is an antagonist of THC and other agonists in CB1 expressing tissues, but also a potent CB2 partial agonist So weakly stimulating the CB2 receptor, not an antagonist. So this is a very interesting combination that we don't see in other substances. And the first reported natural substance that was an antagonist at CB1, but stimulated CB2. And there are many possible uses for such an agent medically, as we'll see. Riddell et al. Looked at THCV in mice, and they were able to see a dose-dependent weight loss that was highly statistically significant. Food intake was reduced at all doses. However, when THC was present, even when it was outweighed 5-to-1 by THCV, there was a loss of this effect. It was suggested that THC, particularly if pure or relatively pure, could be a possible treatment for obesity. A subsequent study out of Italy showed that THCV inhibited cyclic AMP production by humanized CB2 CHO cells, again, Chinese hamster ovary cells, diminished a couple of tests related to induction of neuropathic pain. Carrageenan is Irish moss, and when this is injected, it produces swelling and hyperalgesia, and increase in pain responses. So THC diminished both the edema, the swelling, and hyperalgesia at this 0.3 to 1 milligram per kilogram dose given intraperitoneally. THCV also decreased pain behavior in the phase 2 of the formalin test. Formalin again produces neuropathic pain, and at a higher dose, 5 milligrams per kilogram, it decreased the pain in the initial and late responses. Out of England in 2010, THCV was tested for possible anticonvulsant effects. They used Purkinje cells and it showed a reduction in firing at the CB1 receptor. They tested THCV also in the piriform cortex that's responsible for integration of odor into memory. THCV produced anti-epileptiform effects. It reduced what are called burst complex incidence and paroxysmal depolarizing shift amplitude. And these were shown to occur at what would be possibly attainable doses, concentrations. This concentration of 20 to 50 micromolar is quite high, but many anticonvulsants require high dosage levels, and that's typically true of CBD, so this should not be really a surprise. In pentylene tetrazole induced seizures in rats at a dose of 0.25 milligrams per kilogram, which is relatively low, reduced seizure incidence, and 33% of the animals were seizure-free, which was statistically significant as well. In a subsequent study, they used THCV 2 milligrams per kilogram in rats that were treated with lipopolysaccharide or 6-hydroxydopamine. 6-hydroxydopamine is an agent that is toxic to cells in the substantia nigra and will induce a Parkinsonian-like state. So THC enhanced ambulation, the walking of the animals, and their speed, their mean velocity over controls. When given chronically, THCV decreased the loss of the dopaminergic neurons in the nigrostriatal region, is the basal ganglia. It also attenuated microglial activation. So these are in the inflammatory cells. That was highly statistically significant. Both effects were actually enhanced when there was an extract used. THC showed evidence to reduce Parkinsonian symptoms and provide neuroprotection. So that was in 2011, and we'll see that there have been subsequent studies. In this study, they used a synthetic delta-8 THCV, which we assume would be analogous to delta-9. It's possible that this is a little more stable and could be made in the lab. So in mice, at 3 to 10 milligrams per kilogram intraperitoneally, there was attenuation of elevation of serum transaminases. So these are liver function enzymes. And this is done in relation to whether there would be improvement in damage that was produced by a lack of blood flow to the liver. There was also a decrease in tissue oxidative stress that was noted with these carbonyl adducts and 4-hydroxy-2-nonanol. There were also diminished acute and chronic hepatic inflammation markers, including tumor necrosis factor alpha, CCL3, etc. Also decreased neutrophil infiltration. And there was also a decrease in necrosis, cell death, and etc. With this intervention. Mechanisms of action seem to be mediated by the CB2 receptor, since they were abolished by a CB2 blocker, SR144-528. Once again, Professor Pertwee studied and reported on THCV in 2014. And the feeling at that time, which remains the case today, is that THCV is a partial agonist of CB2 with mixed agonist-antagonist properties, stimulating when receptors are abundant, but antagonizing when less expressed. So that's very complicated and may explain some of the prior confusion. At doses at which THC activates CB2, it also acts as a CB1 receptor neutral antagonist. So this is in contrast to agents like rimonabant, which are inverse agonists and actually knock down the overall tone of the endocannabinoid system. At high doses in some experiments, THCV showed evidence of stimulating CB1. And this would go back to some of the early experiments with high doses where catalepsy, immobility, and analgesia were produced. So again, this requires high doses. It was also noted that THCV was active at TRPV1 to 4 receptors and GPR55, all at 1 to 10 micromolar or less. So these would be possibly attainable in therapeutic applications. John McPartland et al. Did a very useful review in 2015. As you may know, there was quite a bit of controversy in relation to weight loss, anti-obesity drugs like rimonabant that were initially approved in Europe and then taken off of the market because as inverse agonists, they actually knock down endocannabinoid tone and produce not just weight loss, but also depression, anxiety, some suicidality. There were also a couple of cases of multiple sclerosis that were generated. So in comparing THCV to those other drugs, THCV failed to produce nausea in rats like rimonabant would. It also reduced epilepsy responses, as we noted in the Hill study, unlike rimonabant, which actually lowered seizure threshold, made seizures more likely. Little effect was seen in animal models of mood. The dose of THCV that produced anxiety in the elevated plus maze is 30 times higher than that of rimonabant. So there was an obvious increase in safety margin, and it's just not expected that THCV would have the same adverse event profile of the the inverse agonist drugs. And another study in human subjects, Tudge et al., gave 10 milligrams THCV or placebo in separate visits, double blind. They did functional MRI imaging, and responses were monitored to rewards, which included the sight and flavor of chocolate, or aversive stimuli, which in this instance was moldy strawberries. THCV increased the bold responses to chocolate in the midbrain, anterior cingulate, caudate, and putamen. It also increased aversion responses in the amygdala, insula, midorbital frontal cortex, caudate, and putamen. All this suggested that therapeutic application of THCV in obesity would be possible with a lower risk of depression compared to the CB1 inverse agonist. Another study done in 2015, they gave single doses of 10 milligrams of THCV orally or 10 milligrams of placebo in 20 subjects. There were no particular effects seen on mood, energy, or affect. Then there's this paragraph about resting state functional connectivity, etc. It decreased this in the default mode network and increased connectivity and cognitive control and dorsal visual stream network. All this was taken to suggest efficacy in obesity treatment. Jadun et al. Had various treatment arms with CBD or THCV, 5 milligrams twice a day with or without THC, again in humans. THCV decreased the fasting blood sugar. That was statistically significant. It also improved pancreatic beta cell function, the cells that make insulin. Also, significant effect on apolipoprotein A without affecting HDL levels. Interestingly, combination with CBD and THCV didn't produce significant differences. So there was some feeling that although CBD reduces hunger, that the combination wasn't necessarily that helpful. In a subsequent study, humans were given 10 milligrams of THCV versus placebo daily for 5 days with 1 milligram of THCV intravenously on the last day. Only 6 of 10 guessed the assignment, suggesting that there wasn't enough psychoactive effect of the oral THCV to, for people to tell it apart from placebo. There was an increase in intrusions on testing, but also an increase in reverse digit span. So one psychometric measure was reduced, but another one was actually improved. There was an increase in pleasure scores. It was well tolerated. Interestingly, on the last day where THC was given, the effect of it was weakened when it was given with THCV in 9 out of 10. Again, noting some kind of blocking effect on the peak high, at least, of THCV. The impairments, delayed recall from THCV were limited by THCV, and it also knocked down the tachycardia, the rapid heart rate. Very interestingly, in 2016, Etienne Demeyer, who was the chief breeder at GW Pharmaceuticals, reported on how to make more THCV. He noted that wild-type cannabis may contain anywhere from 0 to 2% THCV. They used some chemovars that, to start, had 14 to 69% of their total cannabinoids as THCV and crossbred them. And this was the scheme to do it. So breeders might want to get this paper and study it. But through this inbreeding from multi-cross hybrid combinations, they were able to attain a situation where 96% of the total cannabinoid content was as THCV. Using the same scheme, they were also able to produce very high amounts of CBDV, CBGV, and CBCV. And it was predicted that field yields of THCV could be 60 grams per meter squared, which seems to be very generous. And that was lower for some of the other agents, particularly CBCV, which again is only produced via a recessive gene. A very interesting study out of the Gardner lab at the National Institutes of Health. They again used delta 8 THCV, and it reduced intravenous nicotine self-administration in rats. Also Q-induced nicotine-induced, also reduced nicotine-induced relapse to nicotine seeking in the animals. In mice, it also attenuated nicotine-induced condition, place preference, and withdrawal. So their conclusion was a new and potent anti-nicotine pharmacotherapy for humans may evolve based on medicinal cannabis. Keeping in mind that nicotine is one of the most addictive substances known to man, the same would likely be true for other treating other drugs of addiction. In the 2020 study, again, it was Parkinson's disease was examined in an animal model, what's called PITX3AK mutant mice that have a dopamine deficiency. They were treated with THCV 2 milligrams per kilogram intraperitoneally over the course of 2 weeks. These were animals in which dyskinesia, abnormal movements, were elicited by L-DOPA treatment on measured abnormal involuntary movements, or AIMS. THCV significantly delayed these involuntary movements, reduced their duration and intensity with significant decreases in previous elevated levels of phospho protein and histone PACH3. THCV attenuated the intensity of the dyskinesias within 3 days, even when administered 2 weeks after the L-DOPA treatment. There have been no clinical trials of this in Parkinson's disease, but certainly this provides a foundation for that effort. Now let's compare THCV to CBD. So THCV and CBD both attenuate THC-induced sequelae, side effects. THCV is a neutral antagonist and CBD is a negative allosteric modulator. What that means is CBD binds to another site on the CB1 receptor and alters the binding of THC. As we've seen, both affect TRP channels, although sometimes different ones. For example, CBD seems to be much more powerful at TRPV1, where capsaicin, the ingredient of chili peppers, works. THCV is seemingly much more potent than CBD. What that means is only that fewer milligrams of THCV are needed to be effective for a given role therapeutically. Both seem to have roles in treatment of pain, inflammation, and epilepsy. Both seemingly have anti-addictive effects. And for both, when growing them, it remains difficult to eliminate THC completely from THCV and CBD chemovars, but there's always more trying. Certainly, there'll be people that are interested in genetic modification, but I feel that's not necessary because selective breeding with conventional means can get you very close to or all the way there. Comparing THCV and THC, THCV seemingly would be a nice addition, adjunct to any THC chemovar by complementing its therapeutic properties and attenuating sequelae. This is another way of saying increasing the therapeutic index, the ability to take more THC with fewer side effects. What about economic prospects? The unique properties of THCV seem to offer great promise in treatment of type 2 diabetes, obesity, the metabolic syndrome, addiction, and Parkinson's disease. Certainly, all of these are areas that require more effective and safer products. I feel that the safety and versatility of THCV make it a very attractive addition to various cannabis-based preparations. And I believe that's it. So I will turn things back over to Nisha and we will address your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ethan, for that excellent presentation. At this time, we'd like to encourage everybody to put your questions in the Q&A section, which should be at the ribbon, either at the top or the bottom of your screen. So before we get to Q&A, I want to turn it back over to Dale to introduce our THCV rich cultivar and our breeder. Dale?
Thanks, Nisha, and thanks, Ethan, so much for that great presentation. The reason that I love working with Breeders Best is because we get to promote the work of independent cannabis breeders, and it's extremely exciting to be able to introduce one of those breeders today, as well as the cultivar that we have that is very high in THCV. So this cultivar is called Pink Boost Goddess. It's already pretty famous. It's been featured in various articles, including, I think, one in Forbes. And just recently, it has won quite a few awards. It won lots of awards at Emerald Cup in 2021 and 22, including the highest THCV flower in California both years. It got first place in third-party certified sun-grown flower, 2022 most unique cannabinoid profile, and 2022 exotic terpene profile. And then it was also the first ever winner of the gold medal at the California State Fair. So we're really proud of this cultivar, extremely proud of our association with the breeders, Emerald Spirit Botanicals. And here to tell you more about that is Joseph Haggard from Emerald Spirit.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Ethan, Dale, Nisha, and the rest of the team for helping to put this on. I wanted to start with a quote. This is from Rudolf Steiner, who's been an influence in my whole life. And he said, "For every human illness, somewhere in the world, there exists a plant which is the cure. I believe that there is a healing potential locked inside plants, which is the integral with their evolution. Just as it is part of human evolution to learn to tap this wonderful gift of nature." And that's something that we're trying to do at Emerald Spirit Botanicals. It's my mother, my brother, my wife, and I. And we're really trying to create a space in our garden where we can evolve with cannabis and explore these unique cannabinoids, acknowledging both the science and the spirit, and working with a regenerative farm. One of the things that Dale didn't mention is that we won the Regenerative Farm Award. So we're working to cultivate this Pink Boost Goddess using regenerative practices, using organic practices, and we've been doing that for the last 6 years. So, you know, each year we see the THCV kind of shifting a little bit and growing, and we're really excited to be on this journey, and we feel confident that it's reached a point that we can start to share it with the rest of the world. So thank you, and if you have any questions, I'm here to help.
Thanks, Joseph. Nisha, next is, are we ready for questions and answers now?
We are.
All right.
Thank you. All right. Well, Joseph, this question is actually for you. And so if you could talk a little bit about the components in Pink Boost Goddess, that would be great. There's some interest in cannabinoids, terpenes. Tell us a little more about the plant.
Yeah, so Pink Boost Goddess, everything that we grow on farm is from seed. So there is a little bit of variability within each plant. And what we find is generally what we've been focusing on this point is a 1-to-1 THC to THCV ratio. And then we also have a 2-to-1 THC to THCV ratio. So one where it's equal parts and then one where the THC is slightly higher. We are breeding forward and looking to see if THCV wants to come forward and become a dominant cannabinoid. And we have seen that in a couple of plants. So we know that it is possible, but it seems pretty rare. In terms of terpenes, in general, we're seeing that it is myrcene dominant. And then we have ocimene and terpenoline that are pretty commonly coming in at second and third. And they kind of jump around. Sometimes ocimine's number 2, sometimes terpenoline's number 2. But in general, the top 3 that we're seeing is myrcene, ocimene, and terpenoline.
Great. Thank you so much. Greg asked, it has been said that THCV can be quite averse to highly THC tolerant heavy cannabis users. What is your current thought on that? Evidence-based? So Ethan, I think that one's for you.
Well, I'm not sure what's meant here. Most people that have tried chemovars that are rich in THCV have really liked them. What is typically seen, we give one example at the beginning of the presentation, but typically people say that it's a quick onset high, sometimes a quick offset, but also that it's a clearer high. And this may be the influence of having an agonist, a stimulating drug at the receptor, meaning THC, with THCV, which is an antagonist. Now, that may not make a lot of sense at first blush, but many drugs that are used therapeutically and also can have good effects have this mixture of agonist and antagonist. Functionally, it may mean that THCV reduces the bad effects of THC without eliminating the high entirely or other good aspects. We have no reason to think, for example, that it's going to be antagonistic in pain reduction. That would be a bad thing, but we know that THCV shows benefits on pain as it is. So when you try to reduce this to something that's going to make a lot of sense, you really have to go with what people report phenomenologically, which is generally people like these. And in a chemovar that would be vastly predominantly THCV, you would get different effects, and most prominent would be this hunger reduction, and then ultimately some benefits on lab parameters, the lipid content of the blood, benefits on blood sugar, etc. Those are things that people aren't going to feel immediately, but again, therapeutic in the long run.
Thank you, Ethan. I've been asked, what is the ideal temperature for vaping THCV?
Well, enough to do the job, but not too high. There's a lot of debate about this. It depends on what else is in it. A lot of these substances will actually have effects at a relatively low temperature, like 170 degrees Celsius. Turning the thing up all the way, like to 220, is too high and is going to produce tar and other undesirable byproducts. Now, obviously, most people are going to smoke this. They'll get a combination. Some will be destroyed by the mere act of smoking, a lot will get in. Personally, I favor the lower temperatures because there are fewer pyrolytic end products that could be potentially toxic. So people can tell, you know, if they have an adjustable machine, such as one of the Storz Bickel machines, the Volcano and its successors, people can experiment, but it always makes sense to start at a lower temperature and turn it up, but not too high.
Thank you. Mark asks, what is known about the varin acids such as THCV-A?
Great question. Not much is the answer. You know, I think that's something we have to look at. In general, the cannabinoid acids typically aren't that stable, but I don't know that anyone's done a stability test on THCV-A yet. And what it does, boy, you know, I can't say. But certainly we'd like to find out if people, say, make a tincture of the fresh plant that's rich in THCV or THCV-A, we'd be happy to hear what their experience might be.
Great, thank you. So I think this can go to any of our panelists. Are you guys aware of other cultivars available commercially with high THCV? Joseph, maybe you want to weigh in on that one?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, what other cultivars
asking
are
on
you
something.
aware of that are high in THCV? Commercially available was the question.
Commercially available, I mean, I know that there are a couple different varietals that are may or may not be available. I haven't seen many other ones that are out there. You know, I've heard of a strain called Day Slayer. I haven't seen it in production. And then I've seen another cultivar that was grown by another farmer, but I didn't catch the name of it. But I'm not seeing very many other THCV cultivars out there at this point. I mean, there's the Doug Varins. That's another common one, but I haven't seen that around much recently either.
All right, thank you, Joseph.
Yeah, again,
Ethan?
that's something we'd like to change. So, you know, I think that there's increasing interest, but THCV has been late to the party, so to speak, along with some of the other so-called minor cannabinoids. And part of the mission at Breeders Best is to change that situation and make these available to people that can use them therapeutically or for adult use.
So Ron asks about your thoughts, Ethan, and anybody else on our panel can chime in, on the most commercially viable dispensary available product for today's market based on what is known currently. So the question continues, including whether ideal as a formula such as, or ideal as a formulation combo with other cannabinoids or terpenes. Seems like it might be a little early for a lot of those products.
Yeah, I wish we were getting this question 2 years from now. Right now, I couldn't say. You know, particularly in the California market, I'm just not sure what's on the shelves. But I'd echo what Joseph said, that my experience is that usually amounts of THCV that are available in current chemovars are very low. Even things that should have it, like the Malawi Gold or other accessions from Southern Africa, I think they've had most of the THCV bred out. That would be a typical source of it, but unless the certificate of analysis shows something, yeah, again, we hope that this is a situation in a state of flux and that there'll be better availability.
Thank you. So how stable is THC in formulations such as sublinguals?
Well, if it's there, it's going to get in. It still has never been established how much absorption there is of the cannabinoids in the mouth. We know it's some, because typically onset of effects is going to be faster than if you just swallowed it. In the studies with Sativex, for example, which was an oral mucosal administration meant to be held in the mouth, when people took enough to feel it, onset was in 15 to 40 minutes, whereas with a purely oral formulation, it might take somewhat longer. To find out how much actually gets in through the soft tissues, the mucous membranes in the mouth, is an experiment that's actually really difficult to do. It was never asked for by the regulators like the FDA or in the European Union. And really, it's a hard one and hasn't been done. So we can't answer fully, but the answer is that certainly some gets in. What doesn't get in that way will get in through the gastrointestinal tract after swallowing.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to let everybody know that we have approximately 9 minutes left. We have 26 questions to get through. So if we don't get through all of them, I apologize in advance. So I'm going to try to select some that I think a lot of people will want to know the answer to. So this is an excellent question. Is there a terpene profile that complements THCV?
Well, there'd be a lot of things. It really would depend what the intent is. If the intent is enjoyment and lack of impairment, we might want to see things like limonene and linalool. There are none of the terpenes that I'm aware of that have the effect on reducing hunger that THCV does. So if people were looking for synergy there, I'm not sure what I'd recommend. Right now, it's a matter of trying to find the THCV in as high as concentration as possible and whatever the terpene profile is. Now, again, obviously, there is great opportunity here for selective breeding to get a high amount of THCV with a desirable terpenoid profile. So plenty of work to be done, and we hope that other breeders will be interested in this.
Thank you. Dustin asks, any additional thoughts on CBD interfering with THCV's metabolic benefits in humans? Might there be reason to avoid the combo in Parkinson's or other conditions?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm not so sure that there isn't a good reason to combine the two. And so, if I were formulating, I think it's probably a good idea to have a small amount of CBD. If the idea is to really get the most bang for the buck from the THCV that is available, it probably should predominate. So in other words, a good amount, whatever amount of need is needed of THCV with a relatively low amount of CBD. But again, this is a place where we need people to experiment and give us feedback on what their experience has been.
Thank you. Greg asked if you have seen THCV-rich plants grown in southern latitudes, and then a follow-up to that, Joseph, has your plant been grown in any southern latitudes?
I'll just start first and say that, again, we're in the world, we see the most THCV normally is in Southern Africa. So we're talking about latitudes, south latitudes in the 30s or 40s. So that would certainly apply to Southern US. But normally the concentration is very low, something up to 2%, if that. And what we're really looking for is things that are a lot higher than that. And then I'll kick it to Joseph if he wants to add.
Yeah, so the pink boost goddess at this point has not been grown in the southern latitudes, to my knowledge. We've been breeding it on farm in Mendocino County for the last 7 years, and the genetics we started with were also being grown locally. When we started, it was around every 1 in 50 plants had around 2% THCV, and now we're seeing an average of around 6, 7, 8% THCV. We've seen it as high as 11%. And then, we do still see some of those lower THCV percentages. And then I also wanted to chime in. I think somebody asked about some retail ready products on the market with THCV in them. And I just wanted to plug a couple of different options in California that people can look for. We have the Pink Boost Goddess that's available in farm cut. That's a minimally processed flower that's stored and vacuum sealed in mason jars. And then we also have some pre-rolls and some concentrate products, as well as a tincture of the Pink Boost Goddess. So those can be ordered and shipped to dispensaries in California, but out of the state are not yet.
Excellent. Thank you, Joseph. That answers one of the questions in our queue. All right. Can you influence the THCV content with different environmental factors while growing? And yes, that's the question. If so, what?
Yeah, I'm going to say maybe, but it really depends on what the genetic endowment of the plant wants. The DeMeyer paper goes into, again, the scheme for producing this. But there's some controlling factor, and it may be epigenetic. Dale could address this better. That says whether you're going to deal with the divarinic acid precursor or the olivotolic acid precursor. And that'll decide what the ratio of THC to THCV will be. I'm sure that we don't know everything about this yet, but that's why we need more work on this. We need the shackles taken off, the ability to properly research this plant and helping it to give us what we want.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Let's see, someone asked if Durban poison is a source of THCV.
You would think it would be, given its origin in South Africa, but the COAs I've seen didn't have much of anything. So again, goodness knows whether that's really true to form, whether it was bred out. Again, the major thrust of breeding has been on highest THC possible and all others be damned. We'd sure like to change that and show the plant's full potential.
Awesome. Others have commented here in the Q&A that Jack the Ripper and Jade Nectar also have some THCV in them. So that's interesting. And now all of a sudden my cat would like to chime in and join the webinar with us too.
Equal time with Benson, the golden retriever.
Right. All right. So let's see. We've got several questions here that are specific to vaping, and they're wondering in relation to previous questions on vaporization. There's some info on around the internet suggesting that THCV vaporizes at 220 Celsius. And they're just asking for confirmation. Is that in fact accurate?
It's too high, I believe. Certainly the boiling point is a lot lower than that. I don't remember the exact figure. It's probably somewhere between 158 and 170 degrees Celsius. I know that it will vaporize at those lower temperatures. If anyone has ever seen pure THCV, it's weird stuff. It looks like 3/4 dried epoxy. It is clear like that, incredibly viscous, and it produces these threads like melted mozzarella. So it's very tough stuff to work with when pure. But yeah, I'd suggest the lower temperatures for vaporization.
Great. Well, we are officially out of time. And so I would like to thank everyone for their questions. And I want to turn it over to Dale to conclude our webinar.
Thanks everyone for coming. We hope to hear from you. There will be some follow-up coming to you by email, and we look forward to seeing THCV really improve plant medicine. Cheers.
Thank you.